Okay, so in this video I'm going to be doing implicit differentiation. So let's start solving the questions. Okay, so this is my first question. First thing I'm going to do for x, I derive them normally. So the derivative of x squared is just 2x plus. Now in implicit differentiation, when I have y squared, I have the chain rule. I've not explained the chain rule yet, so but let's see how we're gonna do it. First, I'm gonna take the power outside. I'm gonna put it outside, but then the y, it's gonna stay the same, multiplied by the derivative of y, which is y prime, then equals to 1. Now, I always need, no, equals to 1, equals to the derivative of 1, which is 0, since I'm finding the derivative. Now, what am I gonna do? I need the y prime on its own, so I'm gonna take negative 2x to the other side, is equals to 2y, y prime. Now I'm gonna divide by 2y to get y prime alone, so y prime is equals to divide by 2y, divide by 2y, so y prime is gonna be, negative x over y, since the two cancel out. The doctor did a lot of simplifications. I don't really know what these are, but I will see them later. Now then basically this is the answer for now. Okay, so my second question is x squared y plus xy squared is equals to 6. Now here I have the product rule twice because it's x squared times y, and then x times y squared, so I'm gonna call this 1, this 2. So let's start with finding the first one, x squared y. I have my u to be x squared, my u prime is 2x, v is y, the derivative of y is y prime. So let us write it down. So 2x into y plus x squared into y prime, or you can just directly write it as 2xy plus x squared y prime. So this is, so this is for this. Okay, now let's do for number 2. I have xy squared, u is x, and my u prime is 1. My v is gonna be y squared, my v prime is gonna be 2y y prime. Chain rule, I'm gonna take the 2 out, y stays the same, and then multiply by the derivative, which is y prime. Okay, I'm gonna solve, so I'm gonna get 1 into y squared, we can just write y squared, but then just to show, plus x into 2y y prime. You can directly write it as y squared plus 2x y prime. I just put the x here. Okay, so this is for this. So let's put them all together. Okay, so here we're gonna have 2xy plus xy prime plus y squared plus 2xy y prime. Okay, now I'm gonna derive 6. It's a constant, so it's 0. Now we're gonna go back to the old steps. We're gonna want y prime to be alone, so I'm gonna take all the values that don't have y prime to the other side. So negative 2xy minus y squared is equals to xy prime plus 2xy y prime. Okay, now I need to factor the y prime عشان I get it alone. So y prime into what's left, x plus 2xy. Now what I'm gonna do is y prime, I'm gonna divide by x plus 2xy, so minus 2xy minus y squared divided by x plus 2xy. This is my final answer. Okay, now for this question, I'm given x cubed is equals to 2x minus y over x plus 3y. So what I'm gonna do here, I have the quotient rule. Let's start with this first. I have u is equals to 2x minus y. My u prime is gonna be 2 minus y prime. My v is gonna be x plus 3y. V prime is gonna be 1 plus 3y prime. Okay, now I'm gonna apply the quotient rule. So I'm gonna do 2 minus y prime into x plus 3y minus 2x minus y into 1 plus 3y prime all over x plus 3y squared. X plus 3y squared. Okay, and equals to the derivative of x cubed, which is 3x squared. I'm gonna continue solving here. Now what I'm gonna do is distribute. So 3x squared is equals to, I'm gonna distribute the 2x and 3y, and then my y prime into x and 3y. So let's start doing that. So 2 times x is gonna give me 2x. I like writing them in parentheses so I don't get confused. 2 times 3y is gonna give me 6y. And then I have x minus y prime times x is gonna give me minus xy prime. So no, here there's no parentheses. Wait, I got mixed up with something else. Okay, 2 times x is gonna give me 2x plus 2 times 3y is gonna give me 6y. Then minus y prime times x is gonna give me minus xy prime. Minus y prime times 3y is gonna give me minus 3y y prime. Minus, now I'm gonna open brackets, always open brackets to avoid confusion. Now I'm gonna ignore the negative and just do this part. Okay, so now I'm gonna completely ignore the negative and just do this. Alright, so 2x times 1 is gonna give me 2x. 2x times 3y prime is gonna give me 6xy prime. And then minus y times 1 is gonna give me minus y. Then minus y times 3y prime is gonna give me minus 3y y prime, and I'm gonna close the brackets. Now all over x plus 3y all squared. Now my next step is gonna be distributing the negative. Okay, so 3x squared is equals to, now these are gonna stay the same, and no, they're not included in the bracket, minus 3y y prime. Now I'm gonna start distributing the negative, so minus 2x minus 6x y prime. Now negative times negative is gonna give me a positive y, positive 3y y prime. Now all over x plus 3y all squared. Okay, now let me see what I can cancel to make it easier. So I have 2x and I have negative 2x. These are gonna go. I have negative 3y y prime, positive 3y y prime. These are gonna go. So let me continue. Now one thing I like to do is writing the like terms next to each other so that I don't get confused. So I have 6y plus y minus xy prime minus 6xy prime all over x plus 3y all squared. Now I'm gonna take 3x squared is equals to 6y plus y is gonna give me 7y minus xy prime minus 6xy prime is gonna give me minus 7xy prime all over x plus 3y all squared. Okay, now my next step is gonna be a cross multiplication, so I'm gonna have 3x squared, okay, into x plus 3y all squared is equals to 7y minus 7xy prime. Now I need the y prime alone, so I'm gonna take the 7 to the other side. So minus 7y plus 3x squared into x plus 3y all squared is equals to negative 7x y prime. Now to find y prime alone, I'm gonna divide everything by negative 7x. So over 7x, over negative. So my y prime is gonna be minus 7y plus 3x squared into x plus 3y all squared all over negative 7x. But then we can just cancel the negative and it's just gonna be like this. This would be my final answer. Okay, so here I'm given x is equals to secant y. Let us find the derivative. So x, the derivative of x is 1. The derivative of secant y is secant y tangent y. So here I'm gonna find the derivative of secant first, and then I'm gonna find the derivative of y. So what's the derivative of y? Y prime. So to get y prime alone, I'm gonna do y prime is equals to 1 divided by secant y tangent y. It's that easy. So what I need to do first is derive this. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna derive this secant y. So secant y first is what I derive. Then I'm gonna derive the angle which is y prime, and multiply it. Okay, what I'm gonna do now is this 1 over secant. We know that 1 over secant is what? It's cosine. So cosine y plus 1 over tangent is cotangent y. We can do that, or maybe leave it the same. I don't know, but both give you the same thing. Okay, so now I'm given x squared plus xy minus y squared is equals to 1, and I'm given the point 2, 3, and they're asking me to find the equation of the normal and the tangent. So first I need to find the equation of the, not the equation, I need to find the slope, which is the slope of the tangent line يعني, so I need to find the derivative, which is y prime. But this time we're only going to use the implicit differentiation. So x squared is 2x plus, now xy is product rule, so I'm gonna write xy here. I have u is equals to x, u prime is 1, v is y, v prime is y prime. You're gonna get x y prime plus y. So I'm gonna add it. So 2x plus y plus xy prime minus y, y squared. It's gonna give me 2y y prime. We already explained this, then it equals to 0. It's a constant, so its derivative is 0. Now here, I don't have to simplify to get y prime alone because I have the values. I can just plug them in. So I'm gonna get 2 times 2 plus y, which is 3, plus x, which is 2, y prime, minus 2, which is this one. I'm just gonna put it in parentheses. 3 y prime is equals to 0. Now I'm just gonna solve. We can put it on the calculator, or we can just solve it. So 2 times 2 plus 3, this is gonna give me 7 plus 2y prime minus 6y prime is equals to 0. I'm gonna take negative 7 to the other side. 2y prime minus 6y prime is negative 4y prime. Divide by negative 4, divide by negative 4. So I'm gonna get y prime is equals to 7 over 4. This is my slope of tangent, not the slope of the normal. So this is my slope of tangent. Okay, now I'm gonna find the slope. This is the tangent. Okay, so okay, now I need to find the slope of the normal. To find the slope of the normal, I'm just gonna, normal is the same thing as perpendicular, so don't get confused. So to find the normal, I'm gonna do the reciprocal, which is just flip the fraction. So it's gonna be 4 over 7, and change the sign. So it's gonna become a negative. So negative 4 over 7 is the slope of the normal line. Okay, now I'm going to find the equation of the line. Now I'm gonna solve for the tangent. So we know that to find the equation of the line, it's y minus y0, or y1 into x minus x0, or you can say x1, up to you. So y minus, our y is given to be 3, is equals to m, which we found as the slope to be 7 over 4, into x minus x0, which is given to be 2. So I'm gonna end up with y minus 3. Y minus 3 is equals to 7 over 4. X minus 7 over 4 times negative 2 is going to give me minus 7 over 2. So y is equals to 7 over 4x minus 7 over 2 plus 3. I like solve step by step عشان I don't get confused. So my final equation is going to be y is equals to 7 over 4x minus half. This is the equation of the tangent line. Now I'm gonna find the equation of the normal line. So equation of line for the normal. I'm also gonna do y minus y0 equals to m into x minus x0. Y minus, it's given, and we found the slope to be negative 4 over 7, x minus 2. Now I'm gonna continue. Y minus 3 is equals to negative 4 over 7x plus 8 over 7 when you negative 4 over 7 times minus 2. So y is equals to negative 4 over 7x plus 8 over 7 plus 3. So I'm gonna get my y to be negative 4 over 7x plus 29 over 7, and this is my equation of the normal line. Okay, so in this question I'm given 6x squared plus 3xy plus 2y squared plus 17y minus 6 equals 0. Okay, and they're asking me to find the equation of the normal and the tangent line. So first I need to find my slope, so I'm gonna have to derive. So 6x squared is gonna be 12x plus, now this is product rule, let's write it here. I have u is equals to 3x, u prime is equals to 3, v is 1, v prime is equals to y prime. Okay, so 3y plus 3x y prime. So this is gonna be our answer for this. So I'm gonna write it here, plus 3y plus 3xy prime plus 2 times 2. I'm gonna take the 2 here, so it's gonna be 4y y prime plus 17y prime, and this is gonna be 0 equals to 0. Okay, now we don't need to get the y prime on its own, and we're given values. Now we know that y is 0, so anything with y is gonna completely take all of it 0, so this is gonna be 0, this is 0. Okay, so now let's substitute 12 into negative 1 plus 3 into negative 1 y prime plus 17y prime equals to 0. This is gonna give me minus 12 minus 3y prime plus 17y prime equals to 0. So we're gonna get 12 is equals to 14y prime. Divide by 14, divide by 14. My y prime is gonna be 6 over 7. Now this is my slope of tangent line, not the normal line, so this is slope of tangent. Now, what is the slope of normal? We said we flip the equation and change the sign. Not flip the equation, flip the inner reciprocal of the fraction, so negative 7 over 6. Now let us find the equation. So we have y minus y0 is equals to m into x minus x0. This is for, I'm finding equation of tangent. So y minus 0, which is just going to give me y is equals to, let me just write it so people don't get confused. So y minus 0 is equals to 6 over 7 x minus minus 1. So y is equals to 6 over 7x in, no, sorry, 6 and 7, x plus 1. So I'm just going to distribute the 6 over 7 now. So 6 over 7 x plus 6 over 7. This is my the equation of the tangent line. Now let me find the equation of the normal line. So what am I gonna do? Same thing, y minus y0 is equals to m into x minus x0. Y minus 0 is equals to negative 7 over 6 into x plus 1, because it's minus minus 1, so it becomes plus. Y is equals to negative 7 over 6x minus 7 over 6, and this is my equation of norm. Okay, so here I'm given x squared into cosine squared y minus sine y. So here I have, in the first part, I have the product rule. So let's take u is equals to x squared, u prime is 2x. Now v is equals to cosine squared y, which is okay, cosine squared y, v prime. So what's v prime gonna be? Cosine squared y is the same thing as saying cosine y squared. So I'm gonna take 2 outside, cosine y stays the same. So I'm gonna take the derivative, so the power out, and then what's inside is gonna stay the same because this can also be written as cosine y all squared. So can you see the chain rule now? Multiplied by the derivative of what's inside, which is my cosine now, so negative sine y times the angle, which is y prime. I don't know if that makes sense. Wait, let me explain it again. Let me say I have here cosine squared y. Now this is not related to the question. We're just explaining it here. Okay. Okay. So my cosine squared y can also be written as cosine y all squared. Okay. Now we get the chain rule. So the chain rule, what does it say? I'm gonna get the power, which is 2, take it outside. Okay, that's step 1 done. Now I'm gonna get what's inside and I'm gonna write it the exact same way and I'm not gonna change anything about it. Then I'm going to derive what's inside the parentheses. What's the derivative of cosine y? It's negative sine y. Now آخر شيء I'm gonna derive the angle, which is y times y prime, this. Okay, so this is how I did it. Okay, so here I'm just gonna solve normally now. So I'm gonna get uh okay, I'm gonna write it directly down. So 2x into cosine squared y plus x squared negative 2 cosine y sine y prime. Why did I put negative here? Because negative sine y minus cosine y prime. Okay, now here I have, wait, so this cosine y prime is the derivative of sine y here. Okay, now let me see 2x cosine squared y. Um, so here I forgot to mention, and it's given over the interval 0 pi. Okay, so sorry if I confused anyone. I confused myself. I said so minus 2x squared cosine y sine y prime minus cosine y prime. So now everything that has x is gonna go because I need 0. So this is 0, kill high 0. So I'm left with negative cosine y prime. So equals to 0, obviously. I keep forgetting to add that. So I'm gonna get y prime to be 0 over negative cosine y. And all of this, my y prime آخر شيء is 0.